And now, here's Dr. Pepper.
Hey, and welcome back to Dr. Pepper and Friends, where grit and grace come together for wholehearted living. And it's been a few weeks since our last episode, and honestly, I'm glad to be back. And I'm glad you're here with us. And if you've been following along, the last conversation that we had was with Keisha Nathaniel, and she's new nurse practitioner here at the Pratt Clinic, and we talked about mental health and medicine and faith and all of those kinds of things. And so grateful for the conversation that we had with her. So if you missed that episode, you may want to go back and check it out. But Keisha is awesome, and she's available for appointments if you wanted to come in. So here's the thing I know. Over the last few weeks, I've had the chance to kind of think and reset and think about where we want to head next. And this podcast has always been about real conversations, about life, about relationships, about healing and growth. And in this today we're not going to have anybody else as an interview. It is Dr. Pepper and Friends. I guess maybe today I don't have any friends, but we'll include some other people in the conversation as we keep going. But the thing that kind of keeps rising to the surface is this, okay? The thing I see is there's a lot of people who are trying to live strong on the outside, okay, but they feel really divided on the inside. And most of the time, we don't really have language for that. So that's kind of where we're going. And, honestly, this is an episode, or this is a series that we're going to do that's kind of designed for a lot of the people that I talk to in counseling. But the thing I know in this podcast, there are a lot of people outside of the Pratt Clinic that wind up listening to this. And hopefully it's a starter, or it's a companion, or it's something that winds up being healing for somebody, even if, this is you're not in therapy here with us, that's fine. But we're going to try to give you some tools and give you some things that may be practical and helpful for you. Just kind of as you walk through life a little bit. So the name of this series is called The Parts Within Us. Healing the Inner System. Okay, so that's what we're calling it. And I think it's going to be incredibly helpful, not just for those that are in counseling, but for anyone that has ever felt stuck or has ever felt conflicted in some kind of way. Or in some cases, just find yourself frustrated with yourself. Okay, so let me start with just kind of a simple question. All right, have you ever said something like, there's this part of me that wants to change, but there's also this part of me that is just kind of content doing the same thing, right? Or maybe part of me wants to trust people, but there's this other part of me that just kind of kicks in and keeps pulling away. Or even, I know what I should do, or so why don't I just do it? We find ourselves divided. So if you've ever had that experience, you're not alone, and more importantly, you're not broken, okay? So what if the issue is really not that something's wrong with you, but that you've just been trying to understand yourself all this time, as if you only have one voice inside. And that's where this framework comes in that I want to introduce to you today. It's called Internal Family Systems Therapy, and Richard Schwartz is kind of the founder of this. And I'll refer to it as IFS, okay? But here's the basic idea. Instead of seeing the mind as one single voice, okay, IFS teaches that we all have an inner system of parts, all right? So different aspects of you, each kind of aspect of you with its own perspective, with its own emotions really, and with its own roles. So instead of saying something like, I'm anxious, you may begin to say, there's this part of me on the inside that just kind of feels anxious. Instead of saying, I'm lazy, all right, there's maybe a different way to say it of, there's this part of me that avoids things. And that one shift sometimes creates space where there can be a little bit of kindness that you offer to yourself. And it's that space kind of where healing begins. Now, if this sounds a little abstract, let me kind of bring it down to something that most of us have seen, okay? You've seen the movie Inside Out, okay? In fact, I'm probably going to do an entire episode just on kind of a breakdown of that movie, because when you look at that movie, when you watch Inside Out 1 and 2, they're cartoons, and any really good cartoon, going all the way back to Bugs Bunny, I mean, it's entertaining for the sake of children, okay? But it's also something that winds up being pretty deep for adults. And Inside Out is no exception to this. In fact, it's really by design. If you look at the the closing credits on Inside Out 1 and 2, you're going to see a whole list of internal family system therapists and people that are kind of friendly to internal family systems approach. And it's not meant to be an educational tool for that, but as it turns out, it is an educational tool for that. So if you think about the movie Inside Out, especially Inside Out and 2, you see Riley is the main character. She's a teenage girl, and inside of her mind are all these other characters. You've got joy as a character, sadness, anger, fear, and anxiety in Inside Out 2 shows up in a really big way. Okay, I think one of my favorite scenes in the movie is the emotions are inside the brain, and they're exploring these parts of a teenager, these inner functions of a teenager. And when they're walking through the brain, there's this big rumble, and all of a sudden the ground splits, and one of the emotions says, "Oh, I know what that is. That's a sarcasm." I love that play on words. So anyway, back to our episode. So each one of these emotions inside of Riley has a voice, and each one of these emotions winds up having a job. And I love toward the end where Joy tells anxiety, now you can stay, but you have to stay in your seat. You can't be at the controls anymore, right? And each one is kind of trying to help Riley, the little girl, trying to help her in its own way. And then things start to break down when one of them tries to take over everything. Okay, so that's not just a movie, and that's really kind of a picture of how our life works, how our own system of parts work together. Because you've got this part of you that wants to grow, but then there's also this part of you that wants to stay safe. There's this part of you that wants approval. There's this part of you that avoids pain. There's this part of you that gets frustrated, and sometimes there's this part of you that shuts down. And the thing that we find about all these parts on the inside of us is sometimes they just don't agree. So what do we usually do? Well, we sometimes just try to fight against those parts. We react in ways that sometimes we just maybe distance ourselves from them or numb ourselves from those parts because sometimes we find shame there. We even shame the parts. Sometimes we just try to shut them down. So IFS says something very different. It says, what if every part of you is trying to help even the parts that frustrate you the most, okay? And they're maybe doing that in a way that's not very effective, and sometimes those parts come from really young places in us that were injured and that just need to heal, and we'll talk more about that in future episodes. So let's just kind of take, for an example, one of the most common parts that people deal with, and that's the inner critic. I think we all have one of those. That inner critic. It's that voice that just says, you should have done better. Okay, that wasn't good enough. You're going to mess this up. Okay, and most people hate that part. We don't like that part of us. But what if that part is actually trying to protect you? Okay, what if it believes that if you just push hard enough, then you're not going to fail this time, or you won't be rejected this time. So that part of just kind of pushing you and being critical is trying to keep you from emotional discomfort or emotional pain. And that doesn't make it fun, but it does make it understandable. This is kind of something like that. A great book, if you want to pick this up, is a book by someone called Jenna Riemersma. Okay, Riemersma is how you spell her name. And she's written a book called Altogether You, okay? And this is kind of a faith-based version of internal family systems therapy. And she talks about this in a really helpful way. She points out that many of us spend our lives trying to fix ourselves from the outside, okay? We try to get it right. But what we actually need is to build a relationship with the parts of us that are happening on the inside. So not trying to fight our parts, not trying to shame them, but getting curious about them. And that leads one to really kind of the most important ideas in this whole series, and that is that curiosity heals what criticism cannot. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me, we really kind of begin to ask, what part of me is showing up right now? And that's a question that really changes everything. So now let's bring this in a deeper perspective for just a moment, okay? Many of us were taught, oh, just try harder, suck it up, have more faith, stop feeling that way. But what if the goal isn't to eliminate those parts of us, but to really try to understand them, all right? Now, there is a consistent pattern that you see even in the life of Jesus. I mean, when he comes across wounded people, angry people, possessed people, right? He doesn't move away from them. In fact, he moves toward them with compassion. He moves toward them with presence. He moves toward them understanding them in a way that they've never even understood themselves. And often the places inside of us that we try the hardest to push away are the very places where healing begins. So here's kind of a core idea for today, all right? You are not a simple simple voice, all right? You're a system of parts, and beneath all of those parts is something deeper, and it's called the self, okay? And the self is this part of you that you know that you're functioning in your truest sense of self when you're calm, when you're curious. You're functioning in your truest sense of self when compassion is something comes easy, when clarity is there, when you feel connected to other people. Now, I want you to just kind of stop and think about that. When do you most feel like your truest sense of self? When are you functioning in a way where there's that calmness, that curiosity, compassion for yourself and for other people? And when does that happen with you? See, that when you're functioning in your truest sense of self, it's when you can kind of notice those things that are happening on the inside of you without being hijacked, without being overwhelmed by it. And that's where healing begins. When that part of you on the inside kind of starts to lead, you recognize all these other things that are kind of brewing up in you, but then there's this other more mature part of you that's able to soothe those parts and to be able to say, yeah, I mean, I recognize that these parts are welling up right now, but there's another part of me that's going to make some decisions and kind of take over, all right? So theologically, I want you to think about this, okay? God meant something by you when he made you. All right. He designed you uniquely with a purpose, with a blueprint. But then life happens, right? Sin enters into the scene. Harm comes to you. So sometimes sin is sins you've committed yourself, but sometimes it's when someone sins against you. And these are the things that, happen sometimes. And there's things that when those things happen, especially that you need to overcome them and to develop into the person that God designed you to be, but you didn't get those things, right? So the people who are supposed to offer those to you, often parents, sometimes in your family of origin, sometimes others, for whatever reason, they didn't come through. You didn't get what you needed, right? So then trauma comes and tragedy comes and sometimes bullying, sometimes death, sometimes your own bad choices. When all of that enters in and you don't have the tools that you need to overcome those at the age that you were, okay, then what forms as a result of that is all of this protectiveness, all of these parts on the inside of you that are armoring up and really causing you to be protective in the way that you respond to the world around you, okay? Now, honestly, that can be exhausting. I mean, we organize our lives in a way to make it look like we've got it going on. Okay. And then when the cracks in the armor are exposed, something happens, relationships happen, we either come out swinging or we run for the hills. Or in some cases, we just try to numb out. So enter Jesus, enter the cross, enter the gospel. See, what the gospel says is that you're not okay and you don't have to be okay because as Jesus speaks, he's the one that is able to say, I am truly okay. And he says, I not only have become the substitute for your sin, but in Christ, all things are made new. The gospel says that we can offer ourselves in surrender, and then Christ transforms us by the renewing of our mind, right? Well, into what? What does he transform us into? Well, into the one who bears his image, into the person that God meant at the very beginning. into the blueprint that was set in motion before you were ever even born. That's his job. Now, our job is to lean into bearing the image of Jesus. And when we follow him, then we become our truest self. So let me give you something kind of practical to practice this week. So the next time that you feel stressed or feel frustrated or feel reactive, feel like the armor's coming up, see if you can just pause. See if you can just kind of slow it all down and ask yourself this question. What part of me is showing up right now? And then don't judge it, don't fix it, just notice. Just notice it. And what you might discover is a part of you that's anxious, or a part of you that's trying to control, or a part of you that's really afraid, or a part of you that's tired. And just noticing is kind of the beginning of change. So over the next several episodes, we're going to go deeper and we're going to explore the different kinds of parts and why they develop and how trauma shapes them and how healing actually happens. But for now, I want you to walk away with this, okay? You're not broken, you're layered, okay? There's many layers to you. You are complex. And when you begin to understand the parts within you, then the whole system can begin to heal. Thank you so much for tuning in to Dr. Pepper and Friends, where grit and grace come together for wholehearted living. That's what we're going for. So as we go on in this episode, I want you to just kind of slow things down and be willing to think about the stuff that's happening on the inside of you. All right. So I thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you again in the next episode.